Hello, I'm sitting here in Dreamweaver right now with my version of the tic-tac-toe program. This is the smart version that plays itself, that makes moves and actually plays pretty well. So I'm going to try to build this and run it in the Android emulator. As you can see, I have a site called TicTac over here on the right-hand side, and you have to name the program that you want to build index.html. So as you'll see up here on the top right, I have index.html. So I'm going to go over in Dreamweaver and go to Site, PhoneGap Build Service, and first I'll look at the settings. And you'll see I've put down the SDK location of the Android emulator and Android SDK. So you have to go to Google and download the Android kit for, in this case, for a Mac. Well, this will also work on a Windows machine. I'm doing it on my Mac because I have ScreenFlow and it's much easier to record what I'm doing. So I've set up correctly the location of the Android SDK. So let's close that down. And I'm going to go to the build service and build it. So at this point, somewhere, well, it actually has already built it. And let's refresh this. There we go. So what it's doing now is the first thing it has to do is start up the Android emulator. And what I've discovered is that when I go to launch the emulator, and now here comes the emulator, what I've discovered is that often the first time it launches, the application doesn't get installed. So it tries to, so here it is back here, starting the emulator, Dreamweaver 1, finding the device emulator, waiting for the emulator. So it's waiting for the emulator to start up and before it installs the device. Now, what I've discovered is that occasionally I have to go back to launch, and once the emulator is actually up and running, and once the emulator gets started, you can actually see it down here on the bottom right. There's the emulator. So the emulator is now running. So let me go back to Dreamweaver. But you see we're waiting for the emulator here, but the emulator is up. So let me go back to the build panel, and I'm going to click on this again and launch it again. So this time, notice it's found a running emulator. And presumably it is eventually going to, now it's installing the application. So now let's go back to the emulator. And as you'll see, the Android emulator is very slow, so you have to be very patient. So now it says the application is running. So we'll go back to the emulator. And I'm going to click on Menu now, just to see is anything going on yet. But the emulator really hasn't, the emulator is so slow that the application is being installed, but the emulator is just grinding along very slowly here. Well, it's now been probably 7 or 8 minutes. And the first thing we have to do is very slowly, if you've ever used an Android before, which I'm not very good at, we have to unlock the Android. But it's very, very slow. So we're finally into the Android emulator, which is a beginning. And now somehow we have to get to the apps. And hopefully our Dreamweaver app will be sitting there. And there, finally, this is after many long pauses, there is our PhoneGap build application. That is what we were loaded in. So I'm going to click on that. And again, long pauses. And there is our tic-tac-toe program, finally. And as you can see, this one's pretty smart. We go like that. 01, play again. Notice it didn't put the X down, no? Okay. Let's do this one. It's not showing the last X. I played around with this. So even my tic-tac-toe program doesn't work. There it is, with X winning. So as you can see, the Dreamweaver can indeed download, and here's our tic-tac-toe program. Dreamweaver can indeed download it, send it up to PhoneGap to build, and eventually we'll run it in the emulator. The thing you have to watch out for is that the Android emulator is incredibly slow. I think this whole operation here has taken approximately 10 minutes, most of which I'm going to edit out of the final video. So there we go.